The big print is coming. The print is inevitable. They have to print. Bitcoin will always hold its value relative to what things cost. It has to go to $1 million a coin.
And is George Washington like a sellout and like kind of threw us down the river and we think he's this like revolutionary?
I think the bigger question is
just as money has been manipulated, so has the law. It takes a while to wrap your head around, but herein lies
what is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
I'm joined by Paul Tarantino and John Burnett to dive into Bitcoin's potential to either liberate or enslave us, and whether it's already been captured by the very forces we've been fighting against. John and Paul are actually two of the most dynamic Bitcoiners that I've been talking to lately. I'm glad you guys have joined me for this continuation of our conversation from our first Spiritual Warrior gang. And this is the first time that, or the second time I've done a live in-person recording, the first time with three. So I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. I'm very excited. Paul, you wrote to me the other day, you're kind of interested in kind of getting more into constitutional and common law versus maritime law and how that's been used to control U.S. citizens. So I'm going to kick it to you, John, for maybe like a little bit about what's going on here and what we want to dive into today.
Yeah, the rabbit hole that is for a much bigger rabbit than even the money. So I think maybe kicking it off is to say that just as money has been manipulated, so has the law. And I think probably fair to say is that sound money can be equated with common law, and that both have been subjugated by a manipulated and seemingly artificial alternative. So sound money has been sidelined and put outside of the public psyche, out of everyday use, and then they created the fiat money system on top of it. Common law as well, which is natural law, some call it God's law. It's embodied in the Constitution, has also been sidelined over time and been replaced with a very complex, long conversation. Some call it maritime law, or an amalgamation of statutory law, et cetera, et cetera. But the current legal system, which we all find ourselves abiding by, and the question is whether we really need to do that.
You said they're sidelined. So maybe we could kind of dig into what's been sidelined, where we were, and maybe where we are. I'm trying to like wrap my head around, I mean, we kind of all talked about this a little bit offline. I think this kind of goes back to like what America is, and like maybe the legal definition of America. And maybe that starts with like the Revolutionary War. Like, did we, like, how did it, like, did we really win, or who's the we here? And like, what was the maybe the outcomes there that aren't really considered?
Yeah, I mean, it's this is kind of the convergence of manipulated history and narratives versus the American experiment, if you will. And there's a whole lot to go down, and I'm not versed on every aspect of everything. None of us are, but it seems to be that we're told this narrative that we won the Revolutionary War. And when I was a kid, I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, yeah, we kicked their ass. And then, we won our freedom. And then we, on our own merit, decided to construct a document which we would all agree and govern by. And then it just kind of grew organically from there. And we were the masters of our own destiny. And I think this is quite a Disney perspective as to the revolution, right? And I think that there's good indications that the war was far more financial in nature, the financial system being a system which is intended to control humanity, control the human spirit, control the energy flowing through what we call the economy, which is just humans interacting with each other. And these financial interests never left the battlefield, even if the ships sailed away and there were treaties drawn up. If you look at, say, the Treaty of Paris, it is not negotiated nor written as if we were the undeniable heavyweight champion of the world, right? And but I think, fast forward to when we all grow up, it's important that we don't know that there are still these dynamics at play. We think that we live in um, in the United States of America that was originally founded, which was a constitutional republic, still is. Yet we have all these people talking about democracy and, like, what does democracy have to do with a constitutional republic? It's a totally different form. And so we end up being in a situation where uh, what we believe happened didn't really happen, and all this financial interest that we're currently fighting, the founding fathers were fighting back then. It looks to be so. These financial tentacles never left, and shortly after the Revolutionary War, uh, it was game on. I mean, there was debts that needed to be repaid. The Constitution describes that, and then in the 1800s, most of the constitutional republic was subverted, and then eventually this artificial legal construct, which is not lawful. There's a difference between lawful and legal. Was built on top, and we are all unwittingly consenting to abiding by all these statutes, which are not constitutional nor lawful.
How do the bank the Constitution?
I don't know the specifics. What I
To drive documents.
Well, as we know, the laws and lawmakers are downstream of money creation, and so there was the first central bank, the second central bank of the United States, and then eventually the Federal Reserve. And so this to me is really illustrating the battle back and forth, right? And if you look for this stuff, you can really find it. In fact, I read also recently that the Articles of Confederation, which was the original, it predated the Constitution, was actually more in favor of what we believe or embody the Constitution represents as far as freedom and autonomy and self-determination and all that, and that there was some back and forth on the actual Constitution, which left the window open for the banking interest or financial interest to then perpetuate down the road, downstream, this other means of conquering through this corporate structure, this legal structure, and finance. So, for example, the very creation of Washington, D.C., which is a corporation, is really the USA Inc. that people talk about, was 1871 in the Organic Act. That was enabled by the Constitution. And so it's really I think a very unknown and untold story, that this battle that everybody finds himself in with, Bitcoin really ignited a lot of this stuff. This has been ongoing and never stopping. And so this notion of revolutionary war, we're independent, done, like we're in charge, is really just a nice movie, but it's not reality. And so I think we're seeing now that people are, through technology and through rapid information, starting to see books that were written decades ago or years ago and starting to put these pieces together. So we're on this journey to figure out where we're living in this human show. So
Right, or the Truman Show.
yeah.
How is like I want to talk maybe about debt and servitude, USA Inc. You mentioned 1871, and like maybe we could talk a little bit about how we got to this corporatized state.
Yeah, I mean, this is I'm not claiming to know everything about common law. I am a humble student walking through this very enlightening field of study. And common law is, I had the same experience with finance. When people would talk about the financial system, et cetera, et cetera. It was just wildly complicated for me. And I didn't quite get it, but I got Bitcoin right away. It's simple. It's the concepts are simple. The common person can understand it. They understand value and value retention over time. They don't understand derivatives and CDOs and stuff like that, but they understand a gold coin in my drawer. The legal variant of that is common law, right? To explain common law, it means do no harm. It means you cannot kill or steal anybody's stuff, do them harm, and you need to be honorable in all your dealings. And otherwise, you can do whatever you want, right? As long as you don't, and that has big implications, meaning that I can't impose upon your life or liberty or happiness, and you can't impose upon mine. So it's very easy to understand. And if I do that, if I go and I steal your stuff, or if I hurt you, then I will be subject to a common law court of my peers, right? A jury of my peers. And they will determine what the punishment is based on the crime. You can't have a crime without a victim. So you can't just jaywalk under common law and be held responsible for that because there's no victim, right? This is very intuitive. It's just naturally how people live, and this is still the law of the land today. But through very clever and slow-moving steps, we've been moved from this system into a system of more maritime law, or an amalgamation of various, corporate law, statutory law. It isn't common law, and it's more of the law of the sea, right? So if you imagine, we're here on the land, and you're my neighbor, and we need to live by the law of the land, and we need to respect each other, and if we don't, then we have a remedy. But if we get onto a boat in the middle of the sea, and we're not in our own land, then it becomes more maritime law, where it's the captain and the captain's boat, and there's some guidelines and foundation, but it's more the captain makes the rules. And so effectively, through the creation of these corporate structures, which mimic, name only, the constitutional republic, we've been basically a whole nation on an imaginary boat out to sea, abiding by laws of the sea, and forgetting generationally about the law of the land.
Let's maybe get more back to like the Truman Show, consent, debt servitude, and maybe even things like birth certificates and social security numbers. So like you talk, like we moved into this like system, but like how do we move into the system? How do we choose to move into the system? Are we just born into it? Like, how does that?
Well, can I just interject something? I think a really cool way to understand this is from HR. What is that paper that you printed off there? Where we separated from gold as money. Did you know? There. Yeah, House Joint Resolution 192. 1933. And from this paper, we end up creating this system of fiat, which then needs collateral. That's what I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, this was, it's complicated. So there's a few links in that chain pulling us into this construct. So I think it's important to understand first and foremost that when we talk about lawful, we're not talking about legal. And legal is kind of casino rules. So if you take that same ship analogy, just imagine we're in a casino. And when you walk into the casino door, you're playing the casino games, and it's rigged for the house. The house rules. They make the rules. You can go to the counter and say, hey, I was cheated on that game and I want my chips back. And then maybe there's an arbiter, to keep people from knocking over the tables. But it's really their system of mitigating issues, and so they have their own language in there, right? And so this English, first and foremost, we need to understand, like, this is a language issue. I study different languages, and I have a great friend that's a linguist, and I always thought it was just spoken language, English, German, Russian, whatever it is. But English really has three different variants, which is slang, common English, which we're speaking now, and then Legalese, which is a very real thing. And everybody should look up Black's Law Dictionary and buy it and start reading the definitions for various things. And for example, one that comes up a lot is understand or understanding, where we think it means to comprehend the verbal things that I'm saying, right? And so if I say, do you understand? And you say yes, you think that you're saying, I understood what you just said. I comprehended what you just said. But what that's really doing is, under maritime law, we'll call it for lack of a better word, is you are verbally contracting with me and agreeing with me and giving me your consent. And so the concept of language is super important. The concept of consent is super important, because people will say, I never consented to that, but they did. The problem is we don't know how consent is given and how it's not given. So for example, you can, if somebody says, hey, can I borrow your car? And you say yes, then that's an obvious case of consenting. Like, I'm consenting to let you drive my car. But if you take my car, right, and I don't say get out of my car, that's also consent. So we haven't lost, we have all of our rights, but we haven't enforced them. And by our silence, we're consenting to all this madness, right? And so it's kind of like the Truman Show movie. Every time I read a new book, then I think about that show, and it's more and more relevant. So if you think about Truman's consent, right? Was he consenting to be in there? That's a good question, right? He never said, let me out. But first he has to understand that he's in this paradigm to begin with. And then he has to understand, like, what is actually going on and who are these people and, like, where did all this come from? So you got to chew through all that. And then in no part in that movie did they ever stop him, right? They threw environmental roadblocks into his way. They tried to deceive him through misinformation and all that kind of stuff. They had turned up a storm, and he was, I'm going through this anyways. In no way, shape, or form did he not have free will to get out. But first he had to know that he was in the paradigm, in the Truman Show. Then he had to understand that there was an exit. Then he had to find it, and then he had to go through it. And so we're kind of in the same paradigm, which I believe these movies are all telling us this, right? They need to tell us what they're doing. They need our consent. And by not exercising that consent, we are consenting, or not exercising our rights. Yeah. And so this kind of lays the foundation that then through all these legal moves, like corporatizing the United States, the USA Inc., United States all caps, which is Washington, D.C., that was formed. They did that for every state. And then the birth certificates then are corporatizing us, right? Where we should probably go through this a little slow because it's really a mind bender. But if you imagine a world where there's a corporation that wants to do business with you. In common law, you can't, not an individual, but a man or a woman, a living soul, cannot contract with a corporation. So what they do is they have Cedric LLC, and they create that at your birth, and you don't know that it's Cedric LLC. It doesn't have LLC on the back, but it's your name in all caps, and that's the legal entity which accompanies you like a little name tag in the casino throughout your whole life. And this legal entity is beholden to all the statutes, all the laws, all the casino rules, and you just think it's you. And so by not saying it's not you, you consent. And so this is where common law comes in. They've ridded common law from the population, the knowledge over generations. And there's some really brilliant people talking about this and bringing it back to light. And it's as important or more important than the financial aspect, right? Because it is, with sound money, you can be more and more wealthy in the Truman Show as those Truman Show dollars get printed and printed and printed, and as those Truman Show products get more and more expensive through inflation, but you're still in the Truman Show. So it's
Well, maybe let's go back to 1933 when they said you can't pay your debts with, I guess, gold, or you can't retrieve your fiat for gold. And what that then gave who the ability to do what, like in terms of creating money.
Yeah, so the issue was, I think, controlling the value of the dollar. So it was saying, hey, you can no longer insist for gold and silver as payment. So for example, if we wanted to do business together and I was going to buy a cow from you, they basically said I can no longer insist that I denominate the deal in gold or silver, because as the currency becomes unstable, then that's like a whip flying in the wind as to the value in dollar terms. And so you can imagine what that would do to the stability of the country, or the stability of the control through the fiat monetary system. So I say I want to sell you one cow. I want 10 silver coins. But that could be $100. It could be $1,000, depending on what the currency is doing. So that was eliminated, and it
Read from that document about the section where they outline that, because I think that's very powerful.
I think that's in the book.
Is it in the book here?
Yeah, we should actually get this book on record, Your Honor.
Sure.
Yeah.
So where's the camera here? So this book is Reclaim Your Sovereignty, Take Back Your Christian Name. And this book is incredible. And I didn't actually know at first how incredible it was until some of this stuff clicked. And in the very first page, it stuck with both of us when we read it. So it says, talking about the voluntary servitude. So you have unknowingly volunteered to be chattel for a mortgage held by the financiers from a founding of this nation. You think that the name on the tax statements and bills that you receive is yours, so you respond as though it is. Involuntary servitude. So in order to make this voluntary servitude legal, it was necessary for the government to, quote, leave a hole in the fence. It doesn't matter if the escape route is hidden by legal words of art to make escape difficult. That escape route is not, if that escape route is not used, it presumes your consent. And so they've basically, through this corporate structure, mixed the fake legal plus the fake money means that the citizens have been, or the men and women of this land have been corporatized and used as collateral for the fiat scheme, right? So in this paragraph, it says, under the laws of equity, the United States, all caps, United States Corp., not the Republic, the United States cannot hypothecate and rehypothecate the private property and wealth of its citizens and put them at risk as collateral for its fiat currency and credit obligations to the Federal Reserve Bank without providing the citizens of America with a lawful equitable remedy for a recovery of interest on their risk that is due and payable to them upon demand. The United States, Corp., does not violate the law because the United States provides the sovereign citizens of America with a legal remedy for the recovery of what is due to them.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So we're the debt, we're the collateral backing the new fiat system.
Yeah. And so you can't create this scheme without creating a remedy for the collateral, right? And this is takes a while to wrap your head around, but herein lies the exit from the Truman Show.
Maybe, I mean, we could talk a little bit about that. I mean, it seems like the exits, you have to learn legalese,
Yeah.
but I want to talk a little bit more about like if corporations can create money backed by living souls, and living souls, I guess, become a corporation through the birth certificate, or
We don't become a
not become.
corporation.
We got
Yeah.
assigned one, I guess, or assigned to one.
It is a you can call it a psychological operation. We don't know that that's not us, right? There was actually a very good video from a guy in Canada that's practicing common law since 10 years. And when you're driving a car, you don't actually need a driving license. You're actually traveling, and there's a difference between traveling and driving. And driving is on a commercial capacity in the maritime paradigm, in which you need a driver's license to conduct commerce with your vehicle. But just traveling, you have every right to do so. And so he was talking about when he gets pulled over. And he said, I showed him my license. It was a mistake to do so. But the officer said, is that you? And pointed at his picture. And he said, no, sir, that's a piece of plastic. And this was very illustrative of how you're getting tricked into consenting that you are your straw man, as it's called, right? You are this corporate fiction, but it's just a legal fiction, just like an LLC, right? And so when a police officer, or in this case, whoever pulled him over said, is this you? The common person is thinking, is this your photo? Did you take this photo? Did you put it on your ID? But what he's really trying to do, even if he doesn't know it, even if he's just been trained to ask that question, even if it doesn't know the whole underlying legal situation, he's getting your legal consent to represent that entity and be beholden to all of these statutes. Right?
Maybe let's talk about a little bit then ownership. Then, like, do we own anything, or who owns what?
Well, it depends. If it's your car, did you register your car?
Sure, I registered my car at the DMV. What does that mean?
That means that car is owned by the legal entity created at your birth, if it's in all caps, right? And you can see this, you start seeing it everywhere. It's like you can't unsee this phenomenon where, why is my name in all caps when I get this mail? And why is it not in other circumstances, right? When we're born, we have our name. My name is John Burnett, capital J, lowercase everything else, and Burnett, right? Mr. Burnett signifies the corporation. All caps John Burnett signifies the corporation, right? This is how they get you in court, where they say, Mr. Burnett. And you're like, yep, you have just contracted, you've consented to represent that entity. You just thought that they were calling you by your name, but they were referring to the legal entity which they have jurisdiction over and which is beholden to all these statutes in court, right? It's like if you have a casino name tag that says John Burnett, and they're not saying, hey, John, they're saying your name tag, come here. And you're like, oh, he's talking to me. I'm just going to go there, right? He's just talking to your name tag. But this is the whole.
And your name tag in this case is your corporate standing.
Yeah, and this is done through your birth certificate. Did you want to say something on the?
Well, we kind of went in a different direction, but I think this document is really interesting because
Is this the promissory note?
No, this is the House Joint Resolution 192, which was the 73rd Congress, June 5th, 1933, to ensure uniform values to the coins and currencies of the United States. So this is like the setup. This is the document, which is the setup for creating fiat currency, right? And it's well, the fiat currency system that we deal with today, right? So I'll just read this because there's like, and every time I read it, I get something different from it because I don't understand legalese and I'm trying to learn to speak that language. But it's really interesting because it sort of is the legal framework by which the dollar becomes stable and gold starts to fluctuate, right? As opposed to gold being money and the dollar fluctuating, right? And I just had this conversation the other day with somebody who was talking about how Bitcoin was so volatile, and Bitcoin priced in US/USD is so volatile. I'm like, just reverse it. USD priced in Bitcoin, it's just a consistent downtrend, right, of the value of the dollar. And they don't think like that because we're so ingrained with thinking about the dollar being the stable unit and everything else being volatile. But it's just a belief mechanism that was enshrined in law, and then we, through this Truman Show effect, just started to accept this as the way things are. And over multiple generations, born into a system that you don't understand, this is just the way things are. So I'll read this, and I won't read the whole thing, but it's pretty darn interesting. So to ensure uniform values to the coins and currencies of the United States, whereas the holding of or dealing in gold affect the public interest and therefore subject to proper regulation and restriction, and whereas the existing emergency has disclosed that provisions of obligations which purport to give the obligee a right to require payment in gold, particular kind of coin or currency of the United States, not all capitalized, or in an amount of money of the United States measured thereby, obstruct the power of Congress to regulate the value of the money of the United States, and are inconsistent with the declared policy of the Congress to maintain at all times the equal power of every dollar, coined or issued in the United States, in the markets and in the payment of debts. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled that A, every provision contained in or made with respect to any obligation which purports to give the obligee a right to acquire payment in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency or in an amount of money of the United States measured thereby is declared to be against public policy, and no such provision shall be contained in or made with respect to any obligation hereafter incurred. Every obligation heretofore and hereafter incurred, whether or not any such provision is contained therein or made with respect thereto, shall be discharged upon payment, dollar for dollar, in any coin or currency which at the time of payment is legal tender for the public and private debts. Any such provision contained in any law authorizing obligations to be issued by or under authority of the United States is hereby repealed. But the repeal of any such provision shall not invalidate any other provision or authority contained in such law.
I mean, does this speak to like how money's created now, basically not out of thin air though, based on, sort of like the incorporation of living beings in a way. And if that kind of goes in both directions. I mean, they can create money based on, I guess, collateralizing humans, but what can humans do or living beings do with that?
Yeah, so this basically says, okay, no more denominating anything in gold, right? It's not allowed anymore. And we're going to denominate everything in dollars, and everybody needs to accept dollar denominated instruments, whatever those are. And so at this point, you're kind of in it's a little bit, the exit is still there, but they've closed the exit door, right? It didn't disappear, it's still there. And so in reading this book, the promissory note is really incredible.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to kind of figure out what this is. And it says the Federal Reserve, it says, dear payee, and this is like if I have a mortgage and somebody says your mortgage is due, pay up, or any bill really, any debt. So with this change from being able to request gold and silver as payment, the general population then lost their ability to pay debts. You can't pay a debt with a Federal Reserve note. You can only discharge a debt, right? There's a difference. And so,
and I think it's important to note that previously when we were talking about common law, right? Common law is a law about yourself, your soul, your peer-to-peer type interactions, where this is using their maritime law, equity law, their legal system to pay or fulfill your debt obligation to the creditor. So this would be like a promissory note to the bank that lent you money to pay to pay off your loan. So it's like it's hard initially when you first read this thing. You think like, oh, like this is a promissory note that I'm creating to borrow money, but it's not. It's credit that you're creating as a sovereign individual to pay a debt to an entity.
yeah, and this is the really hard part to grasp, that, okay, if we are the collateral, then the value is with us, right? The whole Federal Reserve note system is based on our energy, so to say. And in order to allow them to perpetuate that system, it seems that they had to shut the door to gold and silver as the demand for a method of payment. And they said the dollar is the only way to denominate, that you can only request in dollars. The byproduct of that is that not only can they create credit, but the collateral can create credit as well. But the key is that we don't know that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm not.
Right.
I mean, that's hard to follow. I'm not really.
Right. So think of it this way, right? Like everybody understands, especially in the Bitcoin space, that banks can create money out of thin air, essentially, right? Cedric wants a loan. You got collateral, you've got income. Sure, we'll create 200,000 in this account. We'll enter the digits. We've just made money out of thin air. You get a loan. In order for them to have that right, in order for the Federal Reserve to have that right, we also have that right. But we don't know we have that right. If we have that right, to basically issue our own fiat, our own sovereign fiat out of thin air, that's a game changer that nobody's ever talked about, right? That you're not taught in school. Why do the banks have this magical authority and we don't? Well, under what this is saying is that under your legal system, under the legal system that you all created, using us as collateral, we also have that right. And therefore you could create credit to pay debts. And that is like unlocking a key.
It's really hard too, because you're saying create credit where, like, I'm thinking, if I go down in my basement and I print bills, I mean, they're going to George Floyd me. I mean, they'll.
That's kind of yeah. If you were going to counterfeit Federal Reserve notes, that would be a pretty big issue.
Right, but you're saying I could create money a different way. That's not a big issue in terms of.
Well, I mean, we're like I'm about like toenail deep in the water. John's probably ankle to knee deep in the water, but this is what we're trying to understand through reading these books and reading these documents is, what does this legal structure really mean for us as individuals and for corporations and for the central bank and for the state? Because if we're operating, it's like the fish swimming in water, and you're like, what are you swimming in? And it's like, what do you mean? What is water, right? It's like, we're swimming in this legal structure that we don't even understand how it works. And if we don't have that, we can't really properly navigate it. And this is giving us little hints and clues, these books, that there's a lot more to learn there and understand, that is and could be incredibly empowering and could have massive implications into your true ownership of assets, all assets.
So let's talk about that. So this you can opt out, and we're talking about true ownership here and what that really means and the implications of that. But maybe what is your take on the big print or the great takening?
Yeah, so it appears, right, from the legal system as a way it's been set, that most of the assets that we think we own, and let's just use the stock market as an example, are held in custody at the DTCC. And they control the collateral. And we have this like IOU, which is our statement from Fidelity or E-Trade or whoever if E-Trade even exists anymore, right? Yeah, my stuff's there, but it's not there.
Right.
You just have this IOU and it's really sitting at the DTCC. And this becomes collateral in the system that basically is backing. It's like an asset of the United States Inc. Another asset, like duly collateralized. We're part of the collateral, our ability to generate energy and assets and revenue and income, but also the things that we think we own are a second layer of collateral in the system. But it's all supporting the debt issuance of money from the Federal Reserve, which is not a part of our system at all, right? It's a private entity outside of our system. We don't have any control over it. So if we can, through understanding common law or understanding how to use their system the way they use it, take back ownership of those assets, like we got cued into by owning Bitcoin and holding keys, right? By not going into the ETF, by actually owning your own coins. When you start to, you understand that take, and then you start to look at these other assets that you think you own and how they're titled. And if they're titled in this all caps name and they're held at a custodian that is a privately held company that's collateral for a Federal Reserve system, which you now understand is creating money out of thin air, it becomes this entire Ponzi scheme where in a financial collapse, that collateral gets taken, and that's the great takening. It gets taken by the creditor, gets taken by the powers that be that own the Federal Reserve.
So I just want to jump in here because everyone's expecting the big inflating.
Yeah.
The big print, like all my assets are just going to fucking go to the moon.
Right.
And it's a race to own the most assets, and that's the way to get ahead in a way.
Yeah.
Because I would say, like, anything you own, even if in self-custody, that's sort of the mentality. Like, whether you have it here or in custody, in your own custody, it's like you want this thing to inflate in dollar prices and be able to maybe perform or purchase your neighbor, and because they got screwed and they didn't own these things.
Right. So let's like use a couple of recent examples and the historical example of the Great Depression that everybody understands, and as to kind of illustrate the point. In 2008, everybody that thought they owned a house found out that as soon as the equity value of that home went below the cost of the mortgage, they no longer owned the home. That it was taken from them, right? It was a great takening of homes in the United States. And the banks that took those assets, well, through what John's about to show you with this promissory note, you may have been able to avoid that. Now, the great takening at a bigger scale is this same concept with equities, right? But it's based on you no longer even, you don't even have title. The DTC has title. And so the United States goes bankrupt. The Federal Reserve is saying we're taking the assets of the United States that guarantee the money that we're lending to you, and they can take those securities right out from under us. They could take land out from under us, real estate. They could take ownership of all that. And unless you understood, or unless this holds up, where No, I can eliminate that debt by creating my own credit, because I am an asset within the system and that I can issue my own credit to pay off that debt.
I think that's important. I'll jump in. I'm so sorry.
It's
To cut
okay.
you off. So I want to read this tweet from Jedi Hill. I don't know if this is a Bitcoiner or a gold guy or what, but it was interesting to me. This is Basel III world going back to gold standard. This doesn't work without some type of major 1929 style crash in a new Bretton Woods agreement. Liquidity is starting to dry up, and at some point within the next 6 months to a year and a half, Trump is going to flip the switch, shut down all the banks, and we go to the new system. I'm personally expecting both crypto and the stock market to drop a minimum of 80 to 90% before the reset. Housing at least 30 to 50% drop in the next 2 years. Gold, silver, and farmland are about the only things that will hold any value.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a good setup for where I was going to go.
Now, who knows what will happen after the reset? Gold will probably be 10 to 30K, and who knows what will Bitcoin do after that point. I think that's really interesting because a lot of people are just imagining like this huge inflation, like I said before, and you defend yourself with the run up. But what if we get in this weird position where your Bitcoin doesn't have the liquidity or the US dollar power?
Well, I think, Cedric, a really good example of that, right? And you hear it in Bitcoin circles everywhere today, where it's like the big print is coming, the print is inevitable, they have to print. And that is a direct output of understanding the system as it has existed since 1933, right? So since 1933, that's right. We could always print our way out of this. And every print drove asset prices up. Now, let's just say hypothetically, the United States Inc. has new leadership and it's going in a direction where you as a central bank are not that happy about the direction it's going in. That doesn't seem to want to play ball with you anymore. And when United States Inc. says, we need you to print, we need you to lower interest rates, instead of accommodating that, the Federal Reserve says, maybe not. Jerome Powell says, yeah, I've got this mandate and I have to fight inflation, and maybe not. Because if I print, we know what's going to happen. We're going to get more inflation, I'm supposed to fight inflation. And I think a way to think about that, go back to the Great Depression, and you think about the setup of the central bank in 1913, a massive liquidity push that runs the stock market up into 1929, highest prices ever. And then liquidity gets pulled. Liquidity gets pulled, the price of everything drops, we have massive deflation, and we're all told from Bernanke in 2008 that, hey, we learned a lot from that mistake, so we're not going to make that mistake again, we're going to keep printing, right? And what if that wasn't a mistake? What if what you were told was a bunch of BS? What if what that was let's let the United States suffer. Let's let US Inc. suffer. Let's let the people starve and go hungry. Let's crater the value of everything they own, because then we will be able to get the IRS installed. And you know what? We'll give them Social Security because it'll make them feel better, like they have a more secure future. And we'll get things changed in Congress, and we'll dig our tentacles in deeper into the state, which will benefit us in the long term. And it'll more greatly capture US Inc. So I'm not so convinced that the great print, and I could be wrong in that maybe we do get another print before we get no print, but at some point we're going to get you know what, I don't like where US Inc. is going, take them out. And the way you take them out is you stop the liquidity, you bankrupt the corporation, and you reset it and you revalue it. And by being the arson and the firefighter, the central bank could come in and embed themselves even deeper into the system and get more control of the collateral in the system, right? So this can be seen by the way the legal structures they set up around the Great Taking, the legal structures that we have within this fiat currency, the whole structure of what this book describes as U.S. Inc. and its subdivisions of the judicial system and the IRS and other agencies that are money collection systems, essentially to pay the central bank, right? So I think Bitcoin will always hold its value relative to what things cost, right? Bitcoin's always going to retain your purchasing power, but don't be so fixated on this. It has to go to $1 million a coin, or it has to go to 10, or it's going here, it's going there because they have to print. At some point, they don't have to print. They never have to print. At some point, it might be more valuable to them to not print because they're not a part of our country. They don't have our interest at heart. And if we have them in our system, we're going to be subject to that eventually. Now, the other thing to consider is, what if we kick them out of our system? What if we say, you know what, forget it. We're done with you guys. We're done with having a central bank. We're no longer going to accept Federal Reserve notes. We're going to issue our own money straight out of the Treasury. That could happen. We've done that in the past, right? We've had Treasury dollars in the past. If we went back to a system like that, then the question in my mind becomes, how kinetic does that get? Because in the past, that has become very kinetic. Because when we've kicked the central bank out, there have been major repercussions at a kinetic level. So I think what John and I have been talking about this is understanding these books and understanding your rights within their own system and how to use the system they created to protect yourself, a way to avoid that kinetic resolution. If there's a way for just a small percentage of the population in the United States to save themselves and strengthen themselves through this process, this could be the next great sovereign movement for humans in the United States. So it like feels like learning this stuff now feels like learning about Bitcoin in 2017. It's like, oh my God, this is so powerful. But I have so far more to go down this rabbit hole. And I just think it's like super valuable to tell everybody, like, go down this rabbit hole, because we're going to need this tool, like John calls it, the karate of the legal system. Like Bitcoin's the karate of the financial system. This is the karate of the legal system. And you have to know how to defend yourself in that system. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, common law, if you compare common law and Bitcoin, and you could lump gold into it or just sound money in general, then, you know, if we'll just say Bitcoin, if Bitcoin is Bitcoin and common law is common law, then an ETF would be the equivalent of our current legal system, right? It's not really lawful. And back to what you were saying about the Great Depression, they kept things really tight for a lot longer than they needed to do then too. And so you have a population, and that's even talked about by David Webb in the documentary The Great Taking. And so you do that, and then you have a deflationary event where you have homes and other things that are encumbered by debt, and then they keep the value really low, and you eventually foreclose. There's no jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And this is, to the Bernanke comment, absolutely they know what they're doing. And in fact, everybody should read the book Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. And this book comes from an interesting place, supposedly found in a government printer, kind of an instruction manual for people kind of involved in this scheme. But it looks at and has like the math and everything for looking at the monetary system as an energy system, like an engineer would do. How do you stress test it? How do you manipulate it? How do you take that energy and move it around and stuff? And if you have all these different, corporations that have, basically, a corporate veneer over what used to be sovereign nations, then you can play this against each other. So I think it absolutely was calculated. And, obviously they will tell us otherwise. But then, all that said, then, if when this 1933 joint resolution was put into place, it basically said that all dollar-denominated instruments need to be accepted, or else you'll be held in contempt of Congress, et cetera, right? And so us as the collateral, it'd be like if we're in a casino and we want to go to the table and we need to go to the window, we need to buy chips. These are Federal Reserve chips. And then we go and we maybe lose them, right, on the table or in the games. But what if we can use our own chips, right? Like, why do we need their chips? And we can go and use them at the table and we can win, and then we can, exchange that for whatever we want. And so, where is it determined that we can't create our own credit if we're the collateral for the entire system?
Maybe that's a good lead in to go back to the promissory note, which is about creating that collateral.
Yeah. It's so this is, and I think everybody should read this and dissect it. I think what we were talking about before, this is if we need as many sovereign, smart minds looking at this particular issue as possible. And so this is a promissory note, as if I am the sovereign and I am going to get a bill from, my mortgage is due or from any bill, and I'm going to satisfy or pay that debt. So it says, "Dear payee, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York states that, quote, money does not have to be issued by a government or be in any special form," quote. This was from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York publication, I Bet You Thought. And I looked that up, and it's legit. It was an educational piece done by it was kind of a educational piece to kind of get people thinking differently about money, is what it seems, away from gold and silver. And it says, Article 9 of the Bill of Rights states that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other retained by the people, right? So this is kind of building a bit of foundation into the promissory note. And it says, therefore I, and it would be whoever's filling this out, therefore I, a secured party creditor of the Federal Corporate United States, believe and certify in good faith under the authority of Article 9 of the Bill of Rights that the right to issue bills of credit and to declare the same to be legal tender for the payment of all unlawful public and private debts has been by the people retained. So we, the collateral, are retaining our right to create this credit. Refusal of this lawfully tendered promissory note places the refuser in contempt of Congress and in dishonor of public policy number HJR 192 of 1933. So you have, in effect, the Federal Reserve saying money can be issued not necessarily by a government, and it doesn't have to be in any special form. You have the Bill of Rights stating that the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not disparage, deny or disparage others retained by the people. And then you have the very system itself saying that if you do not accept this, then you're going to be in contempt of Congress. So by playing by the casino rules, we can effectively, according to this, create our own credit.
I mean, that's insane. I mean, powerful stuff, insane. Like being able to create your own credit and interact with the state on that level. Yeah. Business to business or corporate to corporate, I guess.
And most people have done it, but they didn't know they were doing it.
Well, and you also said something about when that kind of goes through the courts, it doesn't really lead to like a common law victory. It's more of it gets dismissed, so it doesn't really get etched in the system, it seems like.
Well, this has been kind of eluding me for a while, that people have been saying that the mortgage fraud, double dipping, banks are double dipping. So if we can fill out a promissory note for $100,000 and we want to take a loan out on a house for $100,000, the bank asks you for the promissory note first, right? And so then I started.
And the bank drafts something similar to this that you sign that issues them a promissory note.
Yeah. So if we can all create our own credit, the bank in effect says, hey, create credit collateral for $100,000. He takes that money. That is a cash value instrument that can be sold on the open market, right? Bank A could take my promissory note for $100,000 and sell it to Bank B for $100,000 in Federal Reserve notes. They're both legal tender. They're both credit denominated in dollars. One is created by me, one is created by the Federal Reserve. So Bank A takes my promissory note for $100,000, sells it to Bank B for $100,000 in promissory notes, right? I've got nothing at this point. The bank has $100,000 in either my credit or the Federal Reserve credit. So then the bank says, okay, I'm going to loan you $100,000 plus interest, but I've already given them $100,000. So then they give me the $100,000 at interest.
They create out of thin air.
So they create it out of thin air, right? Using me as the collateral. And then I go buy a house with it. And if I miss a payment, they've already gotten my $100,000 before I got anything. And now they're going to take my house and sell it on the open market. So they've gotten $200,000 of real credit, equally valid under the law, under their law, right? And I have to pay interest. And when they crash the system, I have this house with a loan of $100,000. They crash it and squeeze it and tighten and tighten and tighten. And then my house becomes worth $25,000. But I didn't know that I could create credit. And so then they come knocking at the door. They say, hey, we're going to take your house now because you owe us Federal Reserve notes. But the irony is that I already paid for the house outright. I then got shafted with the loan and the interest, and then they come back after they screw the economy, and then they take the house.
It's pretty powerful stuff. Yeah. I mean, and so, you know, as I'm reading through this stuff and thinking about it, you have sort of like common law as the way by which you separate yourself from the matrix. But then you also have this legal system by which you can use it to combat them directly. It's like jujitsu, right? They come at you, attack, and you move slightly, and you deflect it, right?
It's kind of like fighting fire with fire.
And so it's really empowering to try and learn these different languages and these different legal structures, especially in light of what we could be going into over the next few years. And both John and I, as Bitcoiners, are like, we want as many people in the community to understand this and start looking at this, like open source this, like start thinking about it, start communicating about it as a community. Let's get the smartest and brightest people we can to start to share insights and knowledge and really try and grok this, because for somebody like me, I mean, John's taught me a huge amount. He queued me up to these books, and we still, I mean, John will tell you, he still feels like he's just diving into it early still. You know, it's a very, very deep pool. So, but we think that there's a lot there, and a lot of power there that I think Bitcoiners should really empower themselves with, right? Because if you hold your private keys, right? So you hold a bunch of Bitcoin at Unchained and it's multi-sig and yada, yada, yada. But somebody using this legal system comes at you to pay a debt, to offset a liability because of an accident that maybe you're not even really fully at fault at, right? That from a common law perspective, you're like, what are you talking about? But from the legal system or the maritime law perspective, you're liable. They know that Bitcoin's sitting there. You still hold the keys, but right. So so like it's still not clear how you would eliminate this liability, and we don't want to see Bitcoiners get in a position where they're losing something that they thought I own and no one could take it from me. Yeah, sure. You don't have to give it the private keys, but it doesn't mean you get to use the Bitcoin, right? With KYT and KYB and KYC and KY, everything up, you know what? Try and move that stuff. Good luck. Try and use it anywhere. Good luck. So if you don't understand law and you don't understand how to protect yourself from the legal system, then yeah, you've got a lot of Bitcoin that you can't use. And this is sort of the corral that they're building around us, right? It's like, it's awesome having the government be pro Bitcoin. It's awesome eliminating fraud. I mean, like who can argue with that? But we also are all aware that that system can be turned against you rather quickly for things that you thought were no big deal, that just seem natural and obvious, that just your own rights, right? But if that system gets turned against you, it's a very sharp sword. So you have to know how to defend yourself.
Yeah, it's also about sidelining common law, sidelining Bitcoin. For example, in your podcast with Jeff Booth recently, he was adamant, and I agree, that Bitcoin needs to be a medium of exchange in order to survive as a store of value, right? But it kind of ties into this, right? Because if it's not a medium of exchange, you kind of have a de facto resolution to sideline Bitcoin like gold and silver was sidelined, say you can only deal in the dollar, right? And this ties in perfectly with what this is describing here. What happened to gold can happen to Bitcoin, right? And so
they're talking about Bitcoin and gold in the same
exact way.
Exact way.
And so, like what he was saying with it needs to be a medium of exchange. Look at this, right? If people refused this back in the day and they said, no, I will deal in gold and I will denominate my transactions in gold and silver, right? Then it's a different paradigm still, because the free market would act against what they're trying to accomplish with the dollar, right? And, so I think it doesn't just work to have sound money and know the financial piece without knowing the common law and the lawful versus legal piece. Because if they pass a statute which says that, you have to do this or that, and you're still believing that you are that legal entity and that applies to you as a man or a woman, then you're in a pickle, right? And if you don't know how to navigate your way out of that and assert your rights, right? It's like if you're a gold bug or a Bitcoiner in the Truman Show, you're still in the Truman Show, right? You got to realize that the paradigm is there, and you need to say, okay, these statutes don't apply to me. I'm leaving the Truman Show with my gold and with my Bitcoin, and I can interact with that world as necessary, but I know how to engage with it, right? And this, it is far more nebulous and ephemeral than, say, growing food, but it's as important, where we need to learn how to grow food again and learn how to get back to nature. We need to learn money again, which we're making good progress, especially in this community. But the legal side, that is the crux. That is I think the hub of all the spokes, and where financial and legal come together. If this isn't understood, then just holding sound money is not going to do any good, because then you're going to be put through the slow compression of all these statutes limiting freedoms. And you say, okay, well, I've got my gold at home, right? And then I've got my Bitcoin and, held in private keys, whatever. But then they're going to say that you, all caps, need to do this, that, and the other thing. And they slow boil you into a dystopian control structure, right? And that's where that's going. And that's really terrible to think about. But the cool thing is, in order to create the voluntary servitude, they had to leave a remedy, right? And it is our responsibility. And this speaks to Bitcoin too. This is all about self-responsibility. Nobody cares, and they certainly don't care, if you don't exercise your remedy, They're like, it's there. You need to assert it, or it ain't my problem. And I learned this a long time ago, actually, in Germany when I lived there. I I was a early 20 something, and you know how you're like, something bad will happen. You're like, oh, that's not fair. Nobody cares. And so I had a residency in Germany to study, and I let it lapse, and it expired, and I wasn't legal in the country, right, for like a month. I didn't know it, and I go up to the office to try to renew my residency, and I'm all nervous. I'm like, oh, what are they going to do? Are they going to kick me out of the country, et cetera, because I just didn't know. I go up to the lady and I say, here's the story. It expired. And she's like, it's your responsibility to renew it before it expires. And I said, I know, I just didn't know. And she's like, nobody cares, right? Like nobody cares if you don't know what the remedy is, right? It's my responsibility. And I'm like, yeah, like, why should I tell this lady that, oh, I didn't know, and some excuse? Nobody cares, right? And so we can think the system is unfair. I think this is actually a very hopeful revelation for this whole thing, because are we debt slaves, or are we simply volunteering to be debt slaves and don't know it, right?
I like to. We were talking about this on the way over. Imagine a great taking, right? In the not too distant future, where your neighbors' houses are being taken and they're losing the securities in their retirement accounts, and everything's going down in price, and but you're the only one there on the block that is utilizing these tools and keeping your home and keeping your Bitcoin and keeping your cars, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, what the hell is Cedric doing? Oh, this is what you do. Read this book.
Dude, I'm
read
picking
this,
up and
read
moving
that.
next to YouTube,
Right?
man. I ain't staying on that block. That's crazy.
Wait,
They're gonna be like,
what-
why has he got his car still? And
Yeah, is it right? That's exactly what would happen. And then all of a sudden it would be like a brush fire in the Australian outback. It would just, everybody be like, show me, teach me. So if we had a small percentage of the population, 1 to 3% of the people that really understood these tools and really understood this language and helped their fellow man, this could be a very powerful movement. So I think it's sort of like the next tool in the toolbox that we really need to look into. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination I even know what the hell I'm doing yet. But I've looked in the toolbox and I'm like, that looks like something that is really important.
Yeah, and it can't, you it is a byproduct, it seems, of them having to perpetuate their system, right? And so, I mean, you see the enormous lengths which they go to keep us ignorant of these things, right? And we're not weak, meaningless creatures. I mean, like, whether you look at the spiritual side or the money side or the legal side, we have rights, we have powers. If we say no to the food and we quit being poisoned, and we say no to the fake medicine, we say no to the fake money, we say no to the fake legal, and we educate ourselves. Like, if everybody put as much time into this topic, the common law topic, where it intersects with money and real money, like sound money, and what fiat has become because of the amalgamation of finance and this fake law, then if they put the same amount of time researching that as they did in Bitcoin, we would have a bunch of common law experts running around saying, sorry, don't consent. Sorry, no contract, don't consent. I'm not going to engage because I am not that fictitious entity. Right. It even goes further, where people are working to get back control of the trust, their name in all caps, right? And that's a process which I need to look at and see what that entails.
This sort of speaks to the question Cedric asked about individual cases where people have gone in front of the judge, yeah, and used these tactics, and gone in front of the IRS and used these tactics, and just things as simple as a driving ticket to things as important as a mortgage to things as extremely volatile as your taxes, right? And have had those cases settled just like immediately. you know, I don't know if maybe you can talk about some of those examples, because they're pretty. It's pretty interesting when you find out that this stuff has been happening for 40 plus years, and we're not hearing about it. Why aren't we hearing about it?
Well, the taxes thing is really interesting. I've thought a lot about that. And I thought a lot about that in relation to your podcast with Jeff Booth as well, right? Okay, so the IRS is a corporation. And in order for us, there is no law saying that we are required to pay taxes. We, meaning people that live outside of DC and are not working for the federal government, or potentially contractors for the federal government, right? This has come out from IRS whistleblowers, from a multitude of people. It's gaining steam, and people are very much afraid of the IRS, but I'm a firm believer in and decided long ago that I need to factor out fear of all decision making, no matter the consequence. Otherwise, that's a straight road to slavery. So what we're doing by filing our taxes is we're saying, IRS, I agree to pay you this amount of money. I'm going to calculate it. If you, in sometime in the future, think it's different, I'm on the hook either way. If I'm too high, I'm on the hook. If I'm too low, I'm on the hook. Good deal? Deal. Right? Okay, so let's think about that in other terms, right? Like, when would you ever do that? Like, when would you voluntarily contract with somebody and you say, hey, I'm going to perform my part of the deal is I give you a third of my stuff, and I'm going to do a little inventory, and I'm going to give it to you. And if I'm off by a little thing, you can take the rest of my stuff. Like, why would we do that? Right? So don't sign the contract, right? And if you get into common law, you realize that what you're actually doing is contracting. Every time you are engaging in any statute, whether it's you need to pay your taxes that don't even go to roads and bridges, like they say, then you are contracting with these corporations. But is it really you, or is it your legal fiction? Right? Is it that straw man? Is it that all caps you? Right? So it's all connected. And so, you know, if you go to the casino and you say, okay, casino, I'm going to contract with you that I'm going to give you a third of my chips before I leave the door, and you can have it. And in the contract, it says you can come and beat me up if I don't do it. Then they're going to beat you up. You agreed to that. You consented, right? So taxes are, and more people are opting out of that entire scam. Right. And what does it do to the whole Bitcoin thing, right? Everybody's worried about taxes, 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 taxes. If I spend my Bitcoin, it's taxes. If I spend my Bitcoin, it's taxes. Why are they doing that? Because, as Jeff Booth says, it makes it harder to be a medium of exchange, and therefore it will fail as a store of value, right? But then there's the whole another layer where they do these layered approaches. Okay, abolish the IRS. Well, look, like if I go to the company down the road and I know that dude's a swindler and he's offering me a contract that's terrible, right? Do I need to abolish that company, or do I simply not contract with that company? Right? Like, so we get lost in these discussions of abolish the IRS, end the Fed, end the Fed. Why don't you learn that, like, you don't need to engage, right? If we can create our own credit, if we don't need to contract, if we are living souls, if I'm a man and there's a woman, I don't need to represent a corporate entity in a fake casino legal system. So it's like when these things start coming together, you're like, wow, these evil overlords are ingenious. And hats off, respect where respect is due. No, thank you. I do not consent. Right.
It's interesting. The best place to learn sort of that like fake legal system is like at a college bar. You know, I remember 25 years ago, you'd be in the bar and like maybe two people get in an argument and like one clearly starts the argument, the other one does not. Bouncers come over, they grab the guy who did not start the argument, drag him out, beat the living shit out of him. And like, the first guy or girl, like, they can't do it. Well, they did it, and the cops are going to back them up 100% because of maritime law. You're in their bar. They settle that any way they want, and there's just no recourse that you could really expect, I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I didn't think we could do it justice based on what we covered outside, but I think we have. I got to ask 3 or 4 questions before I let you guys go, hanging over from the last one. So these kind of just really stuck in my craw, these 3 particular points. They're not directly related to what we just talked about, but they're kind of probably embedded here somehow. And I'm going to probably ask them in the wrong direction here, but we'll start with, like, there was a comment how like we don't know history, there's a lot of lost history, and that you could just point to like none of us know our fucking grandparents or any of our great parents. And so maybe you guys could elaborate on that a little bit, because I'll just stipulate none of us do. I don't know, I barely know mine. 3 of them died before I was even born, and one of them died, the last one, when I was 8. So like, you could kind of say, okay, well, they weren't really alive, but like it just seems like no one really knows their grandparents or great grandparents. And what would maybe your comment on that or take?
Yeah, so history is much different than we're told. There's the 1800s were very interesting, late 1700s. There's a lot of good people piecing this stuff together, right? You have old technology, ancient civilizations, architecture, which does not belong in the historical narrative. You have, San Francisco was a fully built out Romanesque looking city, way before 1849. And then you have all of these funky buildings half buried by earth with like windows kind of peeking out, half covered. Nobody ever builds like that. So some crazy stuff happened. You have cities that they say were fires. If you go and you just look at like fires on Wikipedia, I mean, they lie about everything, but you get to see the lies.
You turned me out of this, but like every mid 1800s building was like eliminated by fire.
Yeah, like
all the stone buildings collapsed due to fire.
Like literally
everywhere in the United States.
The Chicago one's awesome, right? Because the narrative is that a cow kicked over a candle in a barn and it burned 17,000 stone and brick buildings.
Most advanced city on earth with the tallest skyscrapers, or I don't know if it was at that time, but
yeah, and it burned them all down. And not only did it burn them all down, it turned brick into rubble. It looked like a war zone because it probably was. So there's some missing stuff there. So there's some conflict.
And the World Fair deal is pretty crazy too, right? I mean, the World's Fair was insane.
Which one are we talking about? Like, I know the one in Queens, New York.
You've been everywhere.
There's always one, right? And there's always usually a fire around town, I guess.
I mean, they build these incredible structures seemingly overnight.
Right.
And then they're totally dismantled.
Right.
Well, like, I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Like, I mean, these aren't like tents like we throw up today. These are like insane structures, and then all of a sudden they're gone.
Yeah. If you look at pictures of, like, what's the most like benign name of any town you could probably think about in the United States? It's probably Omaha, right? You're not thinking anything is going to be crazy beautiful or elaborate architecturally, right? It looked like Rome. St. Louis looked like Rome. Chicago looked like Rome, right? All of it was already here before this Wild West settling, right? So there's that missing history. So something happened, kind of a decline of a very big, calling it Tartaria. It's on maps. It has flags. It's people are really exposing it, but there was some kind of warlike reset stuff happening. And if you also then research, or
after the Revolutionary War, so that's where I get really confused.
Yeah, it's confusing. Right, it's piecing together history. Like, how do we know if history is incorrect?
Well, I'm going to stipulate that none of it's, well, correct is not the right word. maybe like who wrote, history is written by the winner, you could say, or who tells it, but I don't know if correct is even point of view a lot of times.
But getting back to like we don't know our grandparents. Think about the architecture. That's wrong. And then think about orphan trains. And
that's my next one: orphans and mental asylums. And I remember, I don't remember anything. I wasn't there, but like it seems like there's if you look, and I don't follow a lot of this, but like if you sniff it out, like maybe older movies, there's a lot of orphans and asylums, and just like in our culture. Maybe I wasn't like an Annie fan or anything like that, but like it just seems like that's a really big part of our culture. Orphans, orphanages, mental asylums. I don't know anyone who went to these things, or even if you do, they're like,
it seems that there was a big conflict and repopulation through orphans, and the insane asylums were ancient old structures for the people that remembered what was. Right. And so when you get into the rabbit hole of how do you make people generationally forget where they came from, right? And there's, I forget which.
So wait, the insane asylums are for people who remember what was. I get that, I think, now clicked. What are the orphans?
Orphans are the children that survived whatever.
The losing tribe, maybe.
The losing tribe, right? Actually, if you've read Anatomy of the State, he says something like
very thin book.
Yeah, it's great though.
Great.
It's powerful. Yeah. And he says something like the state was not born out of some social contract. It was born out of conquest and murder. But the conquering tribe found it easier and more profitable, instead of murdering the conquered people, to let them live and produce while ruling them from within.
And be more docile or domesticated, I guess.
Yeah. And so, we don't live in the paradigm we think, and we have a lot of putting the pieces together with history. I don't know any of my lineage past, the early 1900s.
So they want you to do 23andMe until, the big hack. I think the ERS, the External Revenue Service, I think that's like, we're not getting rid of the IRS. We're just going to get another fucking extraction of our wealth. I think that's being like slow rolled. But so you covered then the grandparents, you covered the orphans and the asylums by I guess I did ask them the right way. But then, who's George Washington? He's like the Satoshi of America.
Yeah, and still to this day, and I would love to get a forum of brilliant minds, all these people looking at lost history. There's some great channels on X and YouTube and Rumble and everything.
Is he a freedom fighter? Is he the Osama bin Laden of the old America?
This is one of my biggest questions. How does the formation of this country intersect with this missing history? Right. Because they want us to believe that they built the Capitol building, right? A bunch of dudes with a horse and cart.
Right.
They
we can't build anything that nice these days.
No, and it's geometrically perfect.
Right.
It is like
there's a lot of symbolism.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous amount of symbolism and for everything from Masonic and the Freemason stuff. So then is George Washington like a sellout and like kind of threw us down the river and we think he's this like revolutionary, but he wasn't? Or was he kind of sold out and he didn't know what he was being roped into?
I don't know, to be honest. Or
because it seems like 100 years later we go through something really bad with like sort of the fires and the asylums, and like was he like the way to get there, or was he like trying to stave that off?
It is one of the biggest questions I have in my mind. What happened in that time, right? Because
I don't think George Washington matters. I'm not getting at it like, oh, he let us down or he's the one we should. But I'm trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah, and this whole, we're led to believe that there was these colonies and it was just like log cabins and a bunch of Indians and some corn and the Plymouth Rock and all that kind of stuff. We weren't told about the obelisks and the huge structures and like every state, right? Every state, look at the Capitol building. They all look the same. They're all majestic old buildings. And look at the old pictures of the 1800s. It's this majestic Capitol building with the dome and all the stuff in the middle of a dirt field, kind of half covered.
Sure, yeah.
No trees.
Yeah, you'll see these things with like churches that are uncovered, like because the street's going down, but there's like most buildings are built above the street except for this one building that's halfway under the street.
And they're all the Capitol buildings are built on ley lines.
Was that on what?
Ley lines, like the natural electromagnetic energetic lines of the earth,
Okay.
right? Gets into ether, free energy, all that kind of stuff, right? Which is coming out more and more now too, right? And so to answer your question, I am so curious, like what really happened in the 1800s and late 1700s in Tartaria? Did it fall? Was it? I've seen pictures of, you know, the British and the American uniforms looking so similar. Was the revolution against somebody? Like it is, you know, was it, who were the Tartarians really? Were the Native Americans descendants of Tartarians? And I mean, that's the screwy thing, right? Like the manipulation of history, right? And they're trying to do that in real time. You see how they're changing Wikipedia in real time. They want everything digital, right? It's very easy to change the story when it's digital. What happens when the servers go down? You know, all of these things, like it. And if you think about generational warfare, it doesn't take long to make people forget, right? So if you take some orphans in the 1800s, they were all in factories working like crazy. They didn't have time to contemplate, how did I get here? What's the meaning of life? No, they were like down to it. They had nothing by design, kind of like the Great Depression. And so then they have kids, and by the time they've made something of themselves, then they're telling the narrative, right? And where did the narrative come from? It came from a lot of these World's Fairs where they started introducing things like products and technologies back into the population, which existed before. And so then they're like, ooh, they had baby incubators because these people hadn't really seen babies before. Well, it makes sense for like a generation of orphans to never see babies.
What do you mean? Didn't they see other babies in the orphanage or something? I don't understand what you mean.
So, I mean, a lot of kids, when they grow up and they're the majority of the population, right? They're not going to have, they're the oldest people at that point,
Right.
to a large degree. A baby's going to be kind of rare. If you have, 300,000 orphans that are like doing all this stuff, by the time they get to 20 years old, they're kind of the first herd, right? And so then they had all these baby incubators in the World's Fairs saying, come look at the babies in the incubator and all this kind of stuff. And then they introduced new products, set the new narrative, right? And they told the people that these were like new construction buildings, which is impossible on so many different levels. And then they destroyed them to get rid of it, right? And so then they had the narrative started, and then those people have kids, the orphans have kids, and then the kids of the orphans have kids, and by that point, the original orphans are the wise ones. Right. They're the grandparents, and they're preaching the narrative that they were taught. And thus, you have the new narrative. History erased, they'll believe what you tell them, right? So it only takes like 60, 70 years to completely replace the narrative for humanity.
So my final question for this round of the Spiritual Warrior Gang is, narratives, and you can place narratives, and, 60 years go by and you're like, oh, that was not what we thought it was or something like that. Is Satoshi a planted narrative? Right? I mean, like, wow, like this guy or girl or group creates this thing that we don't know where it came from. We can't find him. We don't know if he's dead or alive. We know nothing. These are the people that know they track every human being from birth because it's valuable. I mean, that seems far-fetched in the world you just told me about, that one person figured out how to circumvent all of this, release something into the world, and then re-disappear.
I think the question that you're asking is how do
I know that they're not using this to get me to consent to something I don't want to, or you know what I mean? And get into a whole new paradigm I didn't see coming.
Yeah.
John and I have talked about this, and I think the bigger question is, how do you navigate the unknowable?
Okay.
Right. So we will never know for sure, as far as we know. And even if we are told the truth, would we know to believe it?
Right.
So we will probably never know. And like we can talk about lost history, we can talk about aliens, we can talk about 0 point energy, we can talk about consciousness and all these unknowns, right? And lots of smart people come at these things. Even the state comes at these things, universities, education come at these things, and they are bringing probably mostly truth, because any good psyop is 90% truth and 10% psyop. And so what all you can do is really kind of like hold all these options open, look for crossover, look for overlap, where things seem to correlate at a high percentage. There's probably where some truth is, and that these outlying things are to be determined if they're true or not. And if you could hold all those ideas open and then move through life and watch those pieces fall into place, you can be prepared to instantly paint the picture of reality as it progresses. But you have to then, at every point along the way, in the here and now, there's always this infinite spectrum of potentials coming in to drop the next block in the blockchain, right? So Satoshi, I've heard dozens of stories, and there seems to be a lot of really interesting things out there about who this person or these people or this entity could be. And I just think over time, we'll just get closer and closer and closer to seeing something close to reality. But I don't think you have to know it. You just have to keep all the options open and let it fall into place over time.
Yeah, and I don't really think it matters. I think I think human creativity is like water. It'll find a way. And that's why we're suppressed so much. We are incredible beings of immense creativity. And even if it was a bad actor, the end result was good. And so we have, for example, the internet. I mean, that was DARPANet. I mean, they weren't looking out for us. And yes, the internet can be used to enslave us through smart cities and all of that,
And propaganda.
yeah, and technocracy and all that kind of stuff. But we're also discussing these really incredible ideas over the internet. And so it's a protocol. I think that it really is besides the point who made it. And if it was somebody from the NSA, well, there's good people in the NSA too. That's fine. Look at Edward Snowden, right?
Well, I don't know.
And so, maybe not. Who knows?
I don't know.
It really doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, the solution, we don't need to know who did what or who created what. We need to see what it is and what it's doing and what it means, right?
Mm-hmm.
And who mined that bar of gold? It doesn't really matter. It's a bar of gold, and I know what it is. And so if it was closed source, I would worry about it. I wouldn't use it, but it isn't. But the thing about Bitcoin is it is in tune with game theory. So it makes sense that game theory would dictate that at some point, regardless of who the actor is that created it, it would come out into the scene because it's necessary. And human creativity will always find a way. You can be in the most destitute spot, and we will always find a way out. Doesn't mean that it isn't without a lot of pain, but
you say you always find a way out. And I really wonder if we're just like so close to this like tremendous inflection point with everything you guys are saying, like free energy and the internet and all this information kind of breaking free and Bitcoin, or is it really like we're finally getting access to some tools that could be beneficial and knowledge and all this, but it's still going to be a few, and we got another 100 or 200 years of like really this paradigm, but people trying to eke out freedom within it? Or does the whole dam come down one day, and it's like a renaissance?
Yeah, I think, with free energy, with Bitcoin, we will go into a state of abundance That's where it's going, right? Aside from some great cataclysm, which is also possible, but
Like the Tortuans or whatever you say. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not optimistic coming out of this conversation. I'll tell
Really,
you.
I'm super.
I'm optimistic for us as individuals. I'm just not optimistic.
So this is where I think this is how I see it.
And I'm long-term optimistic. Because I just think I believe in optimism, like as a default position. But this sounds like a lot for humanity to go up against.
So I had this
as a collective,
this moment last week where my son, who loves boats and has built a boat, has this vision of this next boat he wants to build, and he's cutting cardboard and taping stuff together and showing me the whole design, and I was just like, you need to put that in CAD and you need to make a 3D model and water tested, computer simulated. And he's like, I'm not going to pay for that. I know it works. So eventually I just, he's 19. I gave him the credit card. I'm like, just go get access to the most robust AI that you can get and start playing with that. And I came home that night and he's like, I got a 3D model. You want to see it? Right. So he starts prompting the AI, right? Showing it, I like this boat. I like this boat. I want to make it this. I want to make it that. I want the dead rise this. Just giving it all the parameters and pulling specs from other designs he likes. It creates a 3D model. And then it asks him, would you like me to change it to this file format so that if we change the dead rise or we change the length or we change whatever, it'll automatically adjust the entire boat? And he's like, yes, let's do that. So it does that. And then says, would you like me to come back with 2D renderings and number the parts and create an assembly, a structure manual so that you can get this sent to a CNC fabricator to cut the aluminum sheets, have them delivered to you so that you could weld this thing together? Yes, let's do that. Okay, I'll be back in 3 days with the 2-dimensional drawings and all the parts and the instructions. And I was like, you did this in like 8 hours today? And it hit me. I'm like, holy smokes. So my son, who doesn't code, does this, sends it to the CNC shop. A robot operating the CNC machine cuts it, loads it on the autonomous vehicle, which then drives it to our house. Our robot goes and unloads it. And then we upload the instruction manual to our robot, who then welds the boat together. And I'm like, we are all China now. Like, it's literally there, right? Like we're just so freaking close to decentralizing fabrication and knowledge of how to build. It's insane. That's absolutely batshit crazy, right? I'm super into farming. So I went home that night and I told the AI, I'm like, I want to create an AI farm, regenerative farm brain. I want you to read everything from Joe Salatin, everything from Greg Judy. I want you to listen to every podcast, transcribe it, load it into an AI brain. How do I do this? And it's like, okay, yeah, I can do that. I can listen to this. We need this software. We need that. You create a Google Drive. I'll upload everything there. And then we can take that, you can curate it, and then we can apply it to your zone, where you live in Florida, your carrying capacity on your farm, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, let's do it, go. And it's building that right now, right? Like, I'm not a developer. This is an insane tool, right? So you start now take that and think about, I forget the name of the general that spoke at Hillsdale College, and this other report that came out of the White House, and they're talking about, the line that caught me was, we have the technology to go from anywhere on Earth to anywhere in less than an hour. Not anywhere on Earth to anywhere on Earth, anywhere on Earth to anywhere. He's talking about, we can pull energy out of space and beam it to Earth. We can pull, like, they're talking about 0-point energy and anti-gravitics or electromagnetic propulsion. They're talking about this stuff without just telling us, hey, we have alien technology and we might have to release this shit, so better get ready. Why would they have to release this shit? Because we have to grow out of this debt problem, right? But this is stuff that we've had, if you read the disclosed documents, since the 1940s and 50s. You combine that with AI, deliver it to any redneck in Florida, and watch out. Like, China's smoked. Like, we're all China. We're all going to be able to build anything we want. We're going to innovate like you can't imagine. So as long as it's decentralized, as long as money's decentralized, as long as we understand our rights in the system, we're about to unlock human ingenuity, human efficiency, human abundance in a way that's still material. We're still taking ideas and trying to form them into atoms. But once that's solved at the human level, then what are you going to do? You're going to sit and your robots and your AI are going to take care of all your needs. What are you going to be left with? You're either going to like melt down because you're like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know my purpose. Or you're going to be like, I'm going to find a higher purpose, right? The people that embrace this will move to finding the higher purpose. The people that can't handle this will leave this world, as Obama likes to say, right? So embrace it, learn it, because it's going to unlock your ability to do something far more meaningful than being someone who just earns money and goes home and buys a house and drives a car, right? Like, there's something that we're supposed to be here to do something way more important than that, but we're encumbered by all this shit just to survive, right? And so if you look at this all from the right angle, it can be the tool to get you to that higher state. But let's like, it's going to be a fight to make sure that we have that. Just like the way we're fighting to keep the internet open, we're fighting to keep Bitcoin decentralized. We're fighting to understand the legal system. We're fighting to get our food clean and all of that stuff, right? So the fight is worth the fight.
Yeah, and I don't. It's a fight is an interesting word, but it doesn't mean kinetics, right?
Yeah.
For example, if everybody makes the decision to take full responsibility for themselves, right? Not farm out any responsibility to the state or to anything else, and take full responsibility for their living soul. And then you start opting out at all the different levels: the money, the law, understand how to navigate it, the medicine, the education, the food. You learn how to defend yourself. You learn how to defend yourself in the digital plane. With digital privacy, you learn all these things, and we don't. This is a metaphor to, like, we don't need to feed the world. We just need to feed our families. And if every family feeds himself, then the world is fed, right? We don't need to change masses upon masses by picketing in front of the Truman Show political theater, right? We need to wake up, check our egos and our ontological shock, take responsibility, and start opting out and learning. And if we all do that, then it dissolves, right? And it's not going to be easy, but I think it's going to be not easy for the people that don't do that. So, and again, it's worth the effort. It's worth the fight.
Sure. I mean, that's why we get together. I'm done.
I have to go to the
This has
bathroom.
been incredible. Until the next one, I'll leave it to you guys. Let people know where they can find you guys and your work, and if you have any parting words, Paul.
Paul Tarantino, Byte Federal, ATM company, wallet producer, point of sale producer. You can find us at bytefederal.com.
And my co-host on Bitcoin Center,
Yes.
Tuesdays at 7:30
Yes,
p.m.
that's right.
Eastern.
John Burnett, launching next month a digital privacy educational platform called Digital Privacy Sessions. It's Digital Privacy X on X and associated other social media. And if you want to reach out personally, it's Truth and Logic BTC on X.
Can't wait for that to come out. I think a lot of us need some more digital privacy. Thank you so much, fellas. This has been dope. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bitcoin Matrix. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with any questions or thoughts you may have. We'd love to hear from you. You can support the show by checking out our sponsors and affiliate links in the description. It helps keep bringing you great content while connecting you with awesome products that I believe in. Share this episodes with your friends, family, or anyone curious about Bitcoin. And let's keep growing this community together. Stay curious, keep stacking, and I'll catch you in the next one.